I am Nancy Rothbard. I'm a professor here at Wharton, and it is my distinct pleasure to have the opportunity to both have a discussion with Peter Fasolo and as well the opportunity to introduce him to you. I had the great fortune over the past couple of days of being able to talk with a couple of folks about Peter who know him well, to ask them how to describe him to you. And they regaled me with his many impressive career achievements, including many, many years in various healthcare organizations, a move to KKR as Chief Talent Officer, responsible for vetting the talent before KKR would invest in a new company. A move back to Johnson & Johnson, where he had been previously, but this time with a seat on the executive committee. And dear to my own heart as an academic, Peter has a PhD in organizational behavior, my own field, and so that was a wonderful point of connection to discover that. And in addition, I learned that with all of these accomplishments, Peter still finds time to pursue his avid love of sailing. And of course, I was left with a people analytics question of my own after doing my research, which is, how does he fit this all in? How does he do all of this? But perhaps these achievements are in fact related to why he's drawn to people analytics in general, given that one of my informants described him as living in the numbers, or in other words, a human computer. Right? We were talking about the singularity the other day, and so perhaps we have that in front of us. And with that as a backdrop, I'd love to dive into a discussion of, Peter, your perceptions of people analytics and how it's playing out. You've been in this business, Peter, for a number of years, both before this people analytics movement and after. So what do you see as new or different in the kind of pre and post people analytics era?
Well, first of all, Nancy, can I bring you home to introduce me to my family that way? Because the only one who welcomes me home now is my dog. So thank you for that kind introduction. Look, I've been very fortunate to be able to, I'm up here on stage representing 128,000 of our employees across a very, very broad company called Johnson & Johnson. And I'm very fortunate to be able to talk about the work that an analytics group that we've put in place over the last 3 years have enabled us to really provide some insights to our workforce. And Doug Grant and members of his team are out here. And over the last 3 years, we've been able to build out a group of close to 12, Doug would tell you, I want more, but 12 full-time analytics individuals, PhDs and others, who are able to help us understand why we do what we do in the field of human resources. If I walk into the corner office of our CEO and ask for funding or ask to do certain things on a global scale, his natural question for me is always, demonstrate to me the return on investment and why we should invest here. And what our analytics group has been able to do is help me provide evidence to outcomes that drive innovation and growth for the organization. And for those that are in the human resources field, you know that in order for us to do our work, you have to be essentially driving towards answering large-scale business questions for the corporation. For us, the lifeblood of healthcare is innovation. And so what Doug's group has been able to do for me is when we advocate certain changes in recruiting or performance management or how we're selecting leaders, we now have a lot of evidence to demonstrate why we do what we do. And I'm happy to talk about any of those areas in recruiting and leadership and health and wellness as we go through our discussion.
Absolutely, and that's a great sort of overview for how this really can change the way we sell the initiatives, right,
Yep.
that we want to make change with. So let's dive in and look at some of those examples. When I was thinking about this, one of the things that often people analytics can do is help us to debunk conventional wisdom.
Right.
Do you have some examples of how your people analytics team have allowed you to debunk some of these, either myths or prove that these things are accurate?
Yes. It's a great question. One area that comes to mind is in the area of recruiting. You can imagine a company of our size and scale. We do well over 17,000 hires and promotions on a global scale. We spend we spend billions of dollars in hiring and promoting individuals. So every hire that we make matters deeply. And we had an assumption in our corporation that hiring experienced workers is a faster way to productivity and performance than hiring college or MBAs. And we were watching, and Doug's team was helping me understand, we were watching this trend going on across the company of seeing a larger proportion of our hiring going to experienced hires and a shrinking number of college and MBA hiring happening around the globe. And the reason that was an important trend for us to watch is that college and MBA hiring is a very, very rich source of diversity and different experiences. We hire chemists and engineers and biologists and sales and marketing people. And so Doug's team helped me understand if that assumption is in fact true or not. So they went back over a 10-year period. They looked at performance measures, performance ratings, sales, profitability over a 10-year basis and regressed, holding other things constant, regressed a variety of different things against performance. And what they were able to demonstrate for me was that there was no difference at all in performance over time between experienced hires and college or MBA hires. It was a bit of what I would refer to as a sugar high, empty calories. It was giving the line leaders a good feeling in the beginning that if I got an experienced hire coming in, they would be up and running pretty quickly. But what Doug's team was able to demonstrate for us is no difference in performance over time, but more importantly, those individuals that we were bringing in at the college or university or MBA hiring level, they were more likely to stay with us, so retention rates were higher, and their promotion rates were faster or greater than the experienced hires. For us, having productive or high-performance tenure is very, very important. We're a healthcare company, so tenure matters pretty deeply to us as we have people in the bench in our research scientist labs. So we were able then to go back to our line leaders and say, you have to be able to bring in more college and university hires because it doesn't matter over time, our outcomes are better. We then relaxed from a policy standpoint because people were holding on to headcount in precious ways and bringing in the experienced hires. We relaxed our policy. We actually increased our university and college hires by 20%. We let them manage labor costs. We handled the headcount costs, and we're now watching our college and university hires going up to the point where it's back to the rates, not to where they were, but to a better trend. Other examples, very quickly, were in the areas of promotions and promotability. One thing that's very big for Johnson & Johnson is to have leaders who are cross-sector, cross-functional, global. Doug's team was able to demonstrate that individuals who had a global assignment in our organization have a 45% higher probability of being promoted through the organization, thus demonstrating that if people have diverse career experiences, they're going to go through our system a little bit faster. They were able to demonstrate to us in performance evaluations that the notion of people giving their own self-assessment really doesn't matter. So you can imagine we have 100,000 people in a performance management system, and part of our requirement was having people give their own self-assessment, time-consuming. We saw no or very little correlation between self-assessment and actual performance. We were able to take that requirement off the system. There were different cultural aspects to that. So we're able, through evidence, to be able to make changes to our systems and be able to demonstrate outcomes that we otherwise wouldn't have been able to do without that evidence.
That's a great example. And I just want to dig in a little deeper on what you just said about the cultural element of that, because I think that one of the really interesting things about that example is that it turned out that in some cultures, right, people were actually very uncomfortable with filling out those performance ratings on themselves, and B, the social desirability of that, in terms of the U.S. or North America versus perhaps some Asian cultures or other cultures, it was very different. So you couldn't really compare those ratings, correct?
That's right. We were actually showing very little relationship between those self-assessments and actual outcomes. To your point, Nancy, there are massive cultural differences that some cultures are less likely to, quote unquote, promote themselves in an optimistic way, others more so.
Right.
And I think most of you have seen the most recent Harvard Business Review article that looked at that. And what I was fascinated about that article on performance reviews was it said more about the rater than the ratee with respect to their own internal biases, rater biases, as you know.
Right, right. So really, I think it's a really interesting example, right, of how...
And then you can take that out of the system, make your systems more efficient, and get those things out of the company that they're not producing any demonstrable outcomes for you.
That's great. That's a great example. So one of the things that I think is really interesting when we talk about people analytics in general is it's both enabled by technology, but it's also, really, it's driven by technology. But technology is also really changing the way we live and work. And one of the things I was really fascinated to discover is that you have a digital life survey that you're doing at Johnson & Johnson. And I think it would be really interesting for all of us to hear what kinds of insights that's affording you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. We're in the very early stages, and our communications leader, Cameron Batten, who's out here in the audience, works with me, is helping us better understand the landscape on a global scale at J&J. As you can imagine, we're a company of 128,000 employees. We have about 5 different generations through our company. And what we're finding and what we're asking is, how do these multiple generations want to receive and access information across the globe? And you can imagine there's some generational differences. And what we're finding is, a good 30 to 40% delta between different generations and how they want and work with content of information digitally, socially, and what we have to adapt to as an organization is how to distribute content to multiple generations on a global scale to ensure our messages are getting out and being delivered. If we just have a plain vanilla approach, we're going to miss 3/4 of our audience. So what Cameron's team has been helping us understand is, what applications do we use? What digital platforms do we use? How are people, if we get it right, feeling more engaged with us? And a big issue for us at J&J is we spend a lot of our time focusing on the importance of engagement of our workforce. Why? Because again, our analytics group has been able to demonstrate that the more engaged workforce we have, the higher outcomes we can demonstrate. And what Doug's team has been able to help me understand is, we, like many companies, do attitudinal surveys. If you know anything about Johnson & Johnson, you know that we have a very, very proud history of our values as expressed through our credo, and we do credo surveys. Every other year, we do off years, we do pulse surveys. And what we've been able to demonstrate is that employees who are more engaged, more involved, have a higher affinity for their supervisor, are actually working in units where their revenues are higher. And at the end of the day, you have to start with the business outcomes, innovation, revenue, profitability as examples, and show the relationship between your workforce and those outcomes. So you have to get to your workforce in the right way, digitally, socially. You have to have managers and supervisors who create environments that are innovative and engaging, but that's not enough. You have to be able to demonstrate the why. And the why is higher profitability, higher innovation, higher revenues on behalf of our patients and consumers around the globe. And this is what we're trying to understand on a global scale through our analytics group.
Great. So I think one of the really interesting things as you talk about this, related to technology, but also related to this wellness mission of Johnson & Johnson, is this question of how do you actually turn off, right? Some of my research is on online social media, is on integration and segmentation of your work and your non-work life. Are you seeing any trends with regards to this in terms of the workforce and the implications for engagement and for wellness?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think all of us would acknowledge the fact that in a highly technical, wired, 24/7 global world where you're following the sun, turning things off has to be very conscious and deliberate, because if we don't do it, the world just keeps moving on us. And what we've tried to understand at J&J is, how do you really engage with your workforce from a health and wellness standpoint? And we have a very, very proud history as a company in investing behind our employees from a health and wellness standpoint. Certainly before I've come into my role, we have a good 30 to 40 year history of a culture of health and investing behind our employees. Now, that's hard to argue with. Everyone would agree that you invest behind your employees, but again, here's where evidence matters. Where evidence is demonstrating to us is that every dollar that we invest in our employees from a health and wellness standpoint, we get close to $4 back in a return. Now, how do I know that? I know that because we measure it. We measure our outcomes in health and wellness. So we have a series of what we call culture of health interventions, culture of health programs. Things like healthy eating, fitness centers, access to occupational health. We have investments in training, not in time management, but in energy management, teaching our employees to be directing their energy to eat better, to be spiritually more connected with their purpose, to ensure that their mental and physical energy is directed towards purpose. I'm proud to say, as I sit here today, we have 50,000 of our 128,000 employees actually trained in energy management. So how does the CEO and the board want to invest behind this when we advocate for it? Well, we're able to demonstrate, for every dollar we invest behind that, our healthcare trends are actually 100 to 200 basis points better than the healthcare index externally. So we invest in training and healthy living and cafeterias and fitness centers and childcare, but we're showing outcomes, which then allows us to invest even more. Now, that to me is real world life evidence, and we're also showing that our engagement of our workforce is at an all-time high. Our engagement scores at Johnson & Johnson are approaching close to 90% engagement for a worldwide workforce. That means our employees are saying to me, I would refer Johnson & Johnson to a friend or family member. I will go beyond the extra effort of my job description. Engagement linked to management, linked to investment, linked to better healthcare outcomes, driving higher revenues, profitability, and innovation. You have to show the link, and what Doug's team has been able to help me with is put your employee at the center of your analytics, and then we're sitting on a heck of a lot of information: performance information, comp information, succession information, wellness information, and the thread of all that is our employees, but then you have to link it to innovation, revenue, profitability, in order for the investments to continue. Mm-hmm. And this is what we're learning at J&J with our analytics group.
Great. So yesterday we had a panel where we asked about the mistakes that people had made with people analytics. And I think that's a really we learn from failure, right?
Yeah, sure.
Oftentimes, and we learn from our mistakes. Do you have an example of where there was a people analytic mistake that, either you learned from prior to it having a bad outcome, or might have misled you in some sort of a way?
How much time do we have on the conference? We're learning like every organization. We're about 3 years into our journey, and I think there's a couple of things that we're learning along the way. Just because you're sitting on mounds of data, you have to be very smart in the question you're asking. Doug's team and we get inundated with hundreds of questions that we could be exploring, but we have to constantly be asking ourselves, to what end? Mm-hmm. You have to stay focused on the outcomes. We sometimes slip into the classic activity-based measures. Don't answer activity-based questions. Answer only the questions that are important to your business from an outcome standpoint. For us, it's growth and innovation. Innovation is obviously the lifeblood. So we've slipped into activity-based studies, for lack of better words, by mistakes. We've chased down different hypotheses, but what we're learning is cut it off fast and be able to be very, very consultative in your approach with your business leaders. Doug's team is getting very wide recognition at J&J, so lots of people are coming in, and he's got to be very disciplined to say, what's the problem, what's the question you're trying to ask, what's the hypothesis, control versus experimental, field-based, and be very, very disciplined in your approach. And we've chased some wrong ghosts in our approach from time
So
to
sort
time.
of the more inductive approach versus, you know, whereas, but that can also lead you astray, right? It can, if you're not careful enough.
It can lead us astray, and I do think it's a professional issue within HR more than a J&J issue. Is my personal belief is that HR should be held accountable just like any other discipline in the organization. Finance has grown up from transactional accounting to strategic finance. Strategic marketing has grown up from sales and analytics and marketing research to strategic marketing. To me, this field of people analytics, and I do think you're all on to what I truly believe is a very, very big game changer, certainly in the field of human resources. The days of simply giving your advice because of what your best judgment is, those days are gone. So we have to be able to demonstrate as a profession why we are advocating and why something works or doesn't work. Because if the field is left just to your intuition or judgment, then you will be relegated to sort of those routine administrative tasks. And those routine administrative tasks, we know where those are all going in the field.
Right.
They're being commoditized. So the real value of human resources, in my judgment, is using people analytics to drive outcomes for your business, your customers, in our case, patients and consumers. And the field of HR then has to be able to work in that domain, minimize the variability of our processes, and play to the outcomes game for your businesses. Great. And to me, this is why a conference like this is so important for us to learn and learn together.
Please join me in thanking Peter for sharing his insights with us today.
Thank you, Nancy.